And that was the beginning of the James Colley trial. Let's get some reaction right now to that and what we can anticipate a little bit later on. Joining me this morning from Jacksonville State University, forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan. Joseph, what a pleasure. I get you, I think, 2 times this week. What a pleasure.
Well, that's very generous of you to say, Jesse. I don't know that everybody would say that, but thank you anyway.
Well, you provide some great insight. So I'm glad that you're here at the beginning, and I really want to talk to you about this. So when you get a case, right, you listen to this, you hear the details of it. We're starting off at the beginning of this trial. What is your first reaction to hearing the details of this shooting?
Total chaos, brutality. Almost an animalistic brutality. This guy showed no mercy in this environment, and there was a significant lead up. Again, we were discussing just a moment ago. I was actually covering this on national news when it first occurred back in 2015, and I remember horrified actually hearing the 9/11 calls and just the reality of what had occurred. And I find it particularly interesting in this world that we live in relative to restraining orders. And, I don't want to go too far down this road, but just the idea of mental health in this country. You see these circumstances. This guy is obviously very violent. And courts, people will say, well, there was no way to predict this. Well, it happens with great frequency. If the courts are in a position to put an individual like this under a restraining order to keep them back, isn't there further obligation? Was this guy ever psychiatrically evaluated? All those sorts of things in the acute state that may have stemmed some of this. This guy had a lot of anger, Jesse, and boy, he really, they reaped the whirlwind. Right.
I mean, it was only earlier in the morning of the shooting that he was ordered by a court to stay away, and clearly he violated that. This is really a horrific case, and unfortunately, like you said, mental health becomes a big issue in this. But you saw the prosecution's opening statement. Let's move to the defense's opening statement. Again, we are revisiting the James Colley trial because a little bit later on, we are going to be live in his sentencing. Let's show the defense. This was one of the weirdest parts of the Colley case. So you see the defense in their opening statement say how they're going to be planning to use this Ambien defense, this prescription medication defense. But they ultimately abandoned it. They said to the court later on in the trial, we're not pursuing this defense. We're not calling a medical expert as planned. Now, Joseph, I was shocked by that. Were you?
Yeah, that he would, throw this out into open court and then suddenly, kind of walk away from it is striking. I really wonder what kind of impact that had from a preparation standpoint, as the court viewed this, people are, sitting there saying, well, I thought we were going to hear about Ambien. I thought we were going to hear about this cocktail of drugs, this sort of thing. So this goes to the level of preparedness, maybe, and thought that you're putting into this, as you're trying to, save this guy's life. Why would you walk away from it at that point in time? First off, why would you even bring it up if you're just going to throw it away in the dumpster? I don't understand.
Yeah, we can talk about trial strategy and defense strategy, but on the upside of our break, I want to talk about whether or not Ambien would be a viable defense here and the effects of it, and your experience in terms of seeing that play out in these kinds of cases. But what we're going to do is we'll take a quick break. Obviously, we have a lot to talk about with the James Colley trial. We're also a little bit later on in the program going to cover back with the police cover-up trial out of Chicago, Illinois. As I said, we will hopefully be planning to interview Laquan McDonald's attorney. So when that happens at about 10 a.m., 10:30 a.m., you're not going to want to miss that. But clearly, we have a lot to talk about. So let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back. That was Rachel Hendricks, the surviving victim, explaining what that shooting basically felt and looked like. It's pretty incredible. But one of the things that we also saw was surveillance footage from a nearby neighbor's home. And if we have it, I want to play it because this is remarkable. You were going to see Rachel Hendricks as well as Lamar Dauberly running down. I think we're still working on getting that video, so we'll wait on showing that in a minute. In the meantime, let me get back to Joseph Scott Morgan because I do want to show that video in a little bit. Joseph, back to you. When you're listening to the details of this, I want to get back to the crime scene. This is a shooting pretty chaotic. How do the police actually canvass this whole crime scene? It seems pretty chaotic and could create some issues.
The first thing from a procedural standpoint is to lock this thing down. Any survivors, when you first show up at one of these scenes, it is essentially an emergent evacuation. If you've got anybody in there that's still surviving, that's still alive, you want to clear them out. But after that, the thing is locked down, becomes a crime scene. And, you have an upside here because a lot of it is contained within a structure, so that's pretty easy to shut down. We take a look at those rear images, from the vantage point of the backyard, that sort of thing. How do you gain access to the area? That's a little bit more difficult. They can also, talk about this this walking trail that's back there. So that opens up a door for the defense relative to people that may have had access to the location. Now, with that said, everything has to be cordoned off. And then even the responding officers have to back out at that point in time because you don't want to taint anything that's going to be contained in there. You've got a lot of broken glass. There's going to be shell casings that are in there. And, of course, not to mention the bodies. You don't want anybody to have access to this area whatsoever. You want to keep it as pristine as you possibly can so that when the crime scene people, the forensics people, and, of course, the detectives show up, they have an untouched scene that they can begin to work very, very carefully. And trust me, this thing is so vast. There's so much destruction here. It will take hours to process this thing. You have to be very careful.
Now, Joseph, one of the things that I don't think I've ever asked you, and we've covered a lot of cases together, when you first see the victim, the dead bodies here, what is that like? It's as an old investigator, you get to the point where you begin to rationalize these things. And the thing that I always relate to my students at Jacksonville State is we're always having to view the abnormal in the context of the normal. That means, we saw those images, for instance, like of the children hanging on the wall. I don't know if you picked up on that. Mm-hmm. And, kind of that domestic environment that we all share. It's a commonality that we have. How is it that the investigator is able to kind of cut ourselves off emotionally from that and begin to work a case? It's one of the most difficult things that you do. It's a learned thing because when you're a young investigator and you're coming into this thing and you're brash and you're bold and you think that you're really good, suddenly you look over and there's a changing table with diapers on it, or you look into the kitchen where someone was preparing a meal. Right. You have to contextualize it and stay focused, and it becomes very, very difficult, particularly when you see these people have scrambled for their life and they're back in a closet. It's not like this is a war zone where you have an expectation where you're going to have dead bodies. The chaos that's rained down on these people's heads is remarkable. Yeah, we're talking about human beings who were living lives up until that moment. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Pretty unbelievable to think that she was there during the shooting and she survived. Now, one of the things I wanted to show you, I think we have it ready now, is there was surveillance footage from a nearby neighbor's house. What you're about to see is Rachel Hendricks running away from the shooting. You see her right there? That's her actually running. It doesn't get more real than that. And a little bit later on, you'll see that Lamar Dobberly, again, Amanda Colley's boyfriend, was running as well. And this is really, really incredible stuff. You see this. I want to bring back in, though, Joseph Scott Morgan to talk about one of the aspects that we brought up earlier on in the program, is that you're listening to the chaotic nature of this shooting. We believe the defense was going to say that the Ambien defense, in their opening statement, they said, look, James Colley was on a combination of Percocet, Ambien, involuntary intoxication, and that we're going to stress that really. Like, why did this shooting happen, this crazy shooting? Now, my question to you is, we could talk about defense strategy and all that. Is it realistic to believe that these drugs could have caused this behavior?
I don't know, Jesse. I mean, yeah, you can get a kind of a lethal cocktail or a very dangerous cocktail with commingling of drugs in one system. But Ambien in particular has, we've seen a lot of ink slung over it over the past few years. We've got everybody from Tiger Woods to a pair of the Kennedys to Roseanne. you know, in the last few years, you know, talking about this. There's been a couple of people that have tried it in court as a defense. And I don't know that it holds water. You know, Ambient's been around since 1992. It's hard to believe that it's been around that long. And it works like other benzos. Like if we think about Xanax and Valium, it just affects the receptors a little bit differently and puts people into sleep, deep sleep. You know, what's striking here is they actually, some attorneys have in courts have referred to it as the zombie defense as well. But listen to what she just said. This guy is lucid. He's talking. As a matter of fact, he's arguing. He showed up with a gun in his hand after he's already trashed the house. It doesn't sound like he's disoriented to time and space at this moment in time. So I think that you would have to go a long way around the barn, if you will, to try to, you know, to make this thing viable before a court. And maybe at the end of the day, that's why the defense, you know, kind of, scuttled this defense. I have no idea, but it just doesn't hold water for me. This guy had enough survival instinct to hop in a car and drive all the way to Virginia as well with guns in his possession. So it's really hard. It's really hard for me to swallow.
Listen, it was strange that they brought it up in their opening statement, and even more strange that they just abandoned it midway through the trial. Again, we're going to take a quick break right now, but let's not forget that at around 10:30 a.m., we hope to be live in the sentencing hearing in this case. We'll be right back. Well, Lamar Dauberly narrowly escaped that shooting. Back here with Joseph Scott Morgan. Joseph, you're listening to the chaotic nature of this. You're listening to the violent nature of this. In your experience, how often do estranged spouses, do these violent acts happen between them? I mean, is this a rarity? Is this something you don't usually see? Or is this something, unfortunately, you see way too much?
Oh, way too much, Jesse. You know, the media and entertainment kind of portray a lot of it is just it's fictionalized accounts of, you know, some stranger in the darkness that comes and attacks us. The reality is this in our country is that the lion's share of homicides take place among intimates. And again, I teach my students that, you know, people are much more at risk with the person that they're laying in bed next to than they ever are with some unknown stranger. Obviously, there are stranger-on-stranger crimes, but, you know, in proximity, this sort of thing, things get heated. You've got these contentious events that are going on, and they just bubble over. And some people just don't know how to manage their anger and how to manage rage and this sort of thing. And they want what they want at all costs. And then it winds up in horrible chaos like this. Very, very slippery slope.
Can't forget that Amanda Colley texted James at one point, "You have seriously lost it." So she kind of knew that this guy, there was not all right with him. You know, Joseph, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we have a lot more to discuss in this trial, and we can't forget that we are eagerly anticipating the sentencing phase. We will have a conclusion to the James Colley saga, whether or not he will be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole or death. Remember, the jury recommended death, but the judge is the one who has to impose it. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Pretty fascinating to see James Colley with his head down as those wounds are described. But right now, I want to break it down. We have a special guest joining us right now on set. Friend of the network, attorney David Eisbrouch is back with us. David, great to see you.
Jesse, pleasure to be here again. Wonderful to be with you. We've been such a history with us.
Hey, no, you were back in the old studio. Now you're here. It's great to see you.
I could have been on your first broadcast.
I think that's true, actually. Yeah, it's been some time.
12 years ago?
Yeah, back in the day, back in the 80s.
Exactly.
It's great to have you back. I want to get right into James Colley. Today's a big day. Now, in your experience, have you ever seen a judge impose a different sentence as opposed to the one that the jury recommended? Because the jury recommended death.
Well, Jesse, first of all, Florida is very unique, is that the jury recommends the sentence and the judge affirms the sentence. In most other states, if not all other states, and I'd have to check this out, the jury will recommend the sentence, and it's the sentence. The judge doesn't need to confirm. Florida is very unique this way, and they actually changed the ruling, or the law, I should say, a couple of years ago, more than a couple, probably going back 10 or 15 years, where this is now now the process in Florida. But in a case like this, from my research and for how long it took the jury to deliberate and to come back with a sentence, I'd be shocked if the judge did anything but affirm the jury's recommendation of death.
Does the judge provide a statement? Does he just impose it? Does he want to make a statement in regards to this shooting, because it's really horrific?
No, the judge probably will make a statement. He heard a statement from the defendant. It was a Spencer hearing where he has his last-ditch effort to plead for his life. So he heard that. There were witnesses called to support the defendant, family members, and try to make their last-ditch efforts of whatever good he's done in the community or humanity for that reason. And the judge certainly, I expect, to go into the gravity of this crime and the reason for him imposing the death penalty.
Realistically, if he imposes the death penalty, when would this man be executed?
Great question. Florida, and I've done a little research on this, there's always an appeal for death sentences, for capital punishment, and there are lawyers and organizations that specialize in these appeals. These appeals take a long time. The last person to be executed in Florida in 2017, the crime was committed in 1983. Over 30 years.
Why is that? Our viewers are fascinated why it takes so long.
First of all, for each step of the appellate process, it takes years for different courts to hear this. Every time an issue is heard, the first court, the state court will hear it. It'll go to the next appellate level. It'll go to the next appellate level, and hopefully the goal is to take it to the United States Supreme Court, which is very rarely heard.
Yeah.
But then issues will be heard. They'll be reheard. There'll be multiple issues heard. It is a long process. Minimum, I would say, is 15 years.
Lawyers, we make things so complicated.
So when an older person gets convicted, real quickly, an older person gets convicted in their 70s or 80s, a death sentence is really a life sentence.
Right,
because
of course.
They're going to live out the appeals.
Yeah, and we've seen those kinds of cases before. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a break. When we come back, I also want to get the perspective of Joseph Scott Morgan based upon the medical examiner's testimony. Let's take a break. We'll be right back.